Strings of Malice, Book 1. Snowflake in an Alley. An old mother nonsense story. Chapter 25. Kalyka. When the shadows and magic cleared, the company was standing in a garden, a different one than they had left, with sunlight streaming down on it from a cloudless sky. The scent of salt in the air and the sound of seagulls, along with the loud crashing of waves, told them they were definitely not in the mountains anymore. The odd looks they were getting for simply appearing out of nowhere were a little less than impressed, their matching travelling gear more than likely adding to the strange sight. Irinka shifted uncomfortably and looked around her friends. They all appeared to be more confused than she was, eyes blinking but far away. She took a deep breath and attempted to imitate Lady Nimue, as she'd been when they had first met her on the train. The girl snapped her fingers in the air and set her features sternly. "What does it take to get some service around here?" It wasn't too much later when a man in a uniform came up to them. "Good morning, miss," he greeted in a polite, posh tone. "We were not expecting arrivals today. May I ask as to your business in the Poison Gardens?" Irinka let out a small breath of relief. Thank the gods above and below. A normal person. "Yes, good morning. A friend was to send us to Kalyka, but I think she may have dropped us a little out of the way. If you'd show me where I can hire a coach to take our luggage, my friends and I will be out of your hair in no time." The man raised an eyebrow at her suspiciously, no doubt thrown off by her less than upper-class manners, but agreed that his staff would assist them to leave the area promptly. He took her words of gratitude with a simple nod and called for several gardeners to help them with their luggage to the front gate. The small parts of the gardens she did get to see were very pretty, and Irinka did end up asking how much a ticket was, in case she wished to return. Her eyes nearly bulged out of her head at the price, but she was duly informed that it was the only garden of its kind, not only in the entirety of Milan, but some said the whole of Cedar. The girl had stolen a few glances back through the gate, until a coach arrived and their things were all packed up. She tipped the garden man with a liter from Lunrith's pouch, and he thanked her promptly before returning to his duties. Irinka sighed to herself and guided her slowly coming around friends into the body of the coach. She pulled herself up next to the driver, carefully shifting her bag in her lap. He eyed her curiously.
Good morning, miss. Where are you and yours off to, then?"
She glanced through the small hatch, through and into the coach before answering. "Any inn that's cheap and we're not going to catch unwanted eyes." He seemed to understand her words as she had intended, and clicked his tongue at his steed to get them moving. The driver was a rather portly man, and after a while offered the girl a sip from his hip flask despite the time.
"I hope you don't mind me saying, miss."
He made conversation as his old horse took them slowly through the bustling city.
"But you look like you haven't slept proper in a year. Are you all right?"
The girl sniffed at the open flask and eagerly took a sip when she didn't smell anything, sighing happily when the familiar burn warmed her insides. "Not quite a year," she chuckled awkwardly, thankfully handing it back to him. "My days and nights are switched around, and churches like to ring their bells at all ungodly hours." The coachman laughed and put his flask away.
"True that. I moved my family outside the wall just last year because of the bloody old things. Can never agree on the time, and they do make an awful ruckus for at least half an hour. Up to 4 times a day, in fact. What sect you a part of, then? I'm not a religious man myself, but I'm pretty familiar with those around here. I've never seen uniforms quite so fancy as yours."
The girl rolled her eyes and scoffed. "We're not a part of any sect." She waved off his question. "We were staying with an entitled brat who threw almost all our clothes away the first week we were under her roof because they were gaudy and undignified." That last part practically saturated in sarcasm.
"Ah, yes. My wife did just the same."
He sighed mournfully, shifting the reins to one hand to wipe salt air from his brow.
Threw out my favourite fishing jacket just the week before last. Said it made me look homeless, she said. It had holes for sure, but what good fishing jacket doesn't?
If you're a fisherman, why are you driving a coach? The girl asked curiously.
I fish for pleasure when I have the time.
The man smiled.
That there's my personal time. Wouldn't be very relaxing if it were my trade now, would it?
The conversation continued to be very wholesome, and by the grace of the gods, normal. As they made for an area the man had informed her was known as Waterside, he figured it best if they were going to be moving about. Everything there within easy walking or a cheap ride's distance, but not so downtown that their fancy uniforms would make them targets to pickpockets. He suggested that she and hers go down to the docks if she wanted the freshest seafood she had ever had. It wasn't long until she had admitted that her friends were a little soft in the head, and she wasn't really sure what to do until they got better. He had taken pity on the tired girl and given her his address outside the city wall in Knotside. He told her to come over if she needed anything. His family was a plain one, but his eldest was home for winter, and he was a bright young thing, got into a school down in Rissoria and everything. It was a pleasant trip. In the cabin of the coach, Dr. Gascares came to somewhat slowly. The sound of Irinka's voice chatting just outside eased his worry at the fact that she was not with them. He glanced around at his two vacant companions as the last few weeks played through his mind. The memories felt like they had happened to someone else, and he had only observed them, but he was sure it was himself.
It would seem Nightshade was downplaying her abilities,
he murmured aloud, hoping the noise might bring his friends back to themselves. Lunrith nodded, apparently already back, and Nimue simply looked more miserable than she had the entire time they'd been in the company of the White Rose. Poor thing. It was going to be a tough road for her going forward. The doctor reached over to touch Lunrith's knee.
My friend, are you with me?
The man's head bobbed, but he wouldn't look at him. From what the doctor could piece together, in the short time of his mind being his own once more, it was likely the man was blaming himself for their extended delay. He was the one she had been holding on to after all. Despite being quite out of it at the time, the doctor vaguely remembered a smile at some point, early on, and one that had jogged even Nimue out of her catatonic state.
Lunrith, what did the lady mean when she said you were dragonkin?
That got the Jinrin's attention, and the doctor even felt Nimue shift slightly beside him. Good to know she was still in there behind those glassy eyes, if only a little bit.
It was a rather odd thing to say.
He encouraged the man gently, barely gesturing to their priestess to get his point across. Lunrith swallowed thickly, but nodded before placing his thumb, middle finger and ring fingers together, and lifting his pointer and pinky to make the shadow of a dog on the coach wall. All the colour drained from the doctor's face, and he broke down into quiet sobs. Lunrith put his hand down and shrunk back in his seat. Irinka heard her friend crying, and silently slipped her hand into her bag to feel if the puppy was still breathing. She was, if shallowly. The girl knew it was entirely petty and uncalled for, but she contented herself with stroking the sleeping creature, while she continued to chat to the driver, asking about the sights they passed and the intricacies of the city. She did lower her voice when she eventually asked about his old horse, and who took care of it when it was under the weather.